Zheng Shuyi, the famous financial reporter known for her beauty and wealth, has just found out that her boyfriend has been cheating on her. And get this, he's been seeing someone from a rich family, a lowlife who now wants to break up with her. He says they should stay friends because his new girlfriend's family is wealthy. Her uncle even drives a Rolls-Royce with a custom license plate. Shuyi is furious. She tells him flat out that she won't be friends with him. She insists he leave right now. She doesn't care about his new girlfriend's rich family or the fancy car. One day, they'll have to show her respect and call her Auntie, and when that happens, she plans to make sure his entire family gets a taste of her revenge. Shuyi walks over to a car and asks the driver for a ride, saying her phone's dead. The driver looks at her and says he doesn't give rides to women who have boyfriends. As she watches him, she starts to wonder if he's the rich guy she turned down before. Determined to get back at him, Shuyi decides to interview at his company and aims to become his aunt. On the day of the interview, she dresses up beautifully and tells the director how excited she is for this meeting. She then asks him if he's available right now. It's a busy morning at the Financial Weekly office. Everyone is moving around, working on different tasks, and talking about their projects. Shuyi is at her desk, concentrating on her work, when her phone rings. She sees it's an unknown number and gets curious. She picks up the phone, and a voice on the other end asks if this is reporter Shuyi from Financial Weekly. She says yes, that's her. The caller introduces himself as Chen Sheng, the assistant to the director of Mingyu's bank. He explains that there's an important update about the interview with director Xiyang that was scheduled with her magazine. Chen tells her that, because of some personal reasons, they need to postpone the interview. It won't be on the original date, but will be pushed back to a week later. He apologizes for any trouble this might cause, and says they'll confirm the new details soon. Shuyi feels disappointed when she hears the news. She knows that interviews are all about timing, and if this one gets pushed back a week, it might be too late for their needs. She tells Chen that delaying the interview will mess up their business plans and coverage. She insists he should try to get director Xiyang to find some time for the interview tomorrow instead of waiting a whole week. She stresses how important this is for their schedule, and how worried she is about the delay. She also suggests another solution. She proposes doing the interview tonight over the phone, which could take about 2 hours. This way, they can avoid further delays. Chen tells her that director Xiyang has a big dinner tonight, and might not be able to fit the interview in. However, he agrees to help by finding a place where Shuyi can wait. He mentions that while he'll do his best, he can't promise the interview will happen tonight. Shuyi, determined to make it work, asks for the address of the waiting spot and assures him she'll be there as soon as she gets the details. As for Xiyang, he is the director of Mingyu's bank, the person Shuyi is trying to interview. Amid the general mood of doubt and pessimism, Xiyang, at just 27, has turned around his family's business, Mingyu Bank, which was almost in crisis. He's made a big name for himself in the financial world. Just hearing Xiyang is enough to grab attention. The reporter who interviews him will definitely get a lot of notice. Back at the office after the call, Shuyi is lying tiredly on her desk. Her colleague asks if she's not going to celebrate her boyfriend's birthday with him tonight. Shuyi says no, she has to meet with Xiyang tonight. On top of that, Shuyi is on her period. Her boyfriend calls her and says he'll come pick her up after work. She tells him she has an important interview to do. He says it's fine and that he'll just hang out with some friends instead. She apologizes and tells him she's not feeling great, so she won't be able to watch movies with him later. He quickly agrees, saying they can celebrate next year. He says he'll go back to work and promises to pick her up after the interview, then ends the call. Her colleague comments that her boyfriend is really understanding. They say if it was their boyfriend, he would definitely be upset about not spending time together, no matter what excuse they gave. Shuyi thinks about what her colleague said and realizes her boyfriend must be really understanding. He didn't even ask why she wasn't feeling great, but just hung up. She chides herself for overthinking, figuring it's just because she's on her period. Since she chose work over her boyfriend, she decides she's going to do a great job on the interview. She heads to the address she was given. She sits alone in the waiting hall. It's been over 2 hours, and she hopes the interview will be a success. She's feeling some pain and regrets not taking more painkillers earlier. As she's focused on her laptop, someone walks in. It's Qin Xiaoming, the second-in-command at Mingyu's group, and Xiyang's brother-in-law. He looks at her and is about to speak when her phone rings. She answers quickly, and Assistant Chen apologizes, saying that the dinner just ended, but Director Xiyang still has other things to do, so the interview can't happen tonight. Shuyi says she understands. She packs up her things and starts to leave. As she walks out of the building, she notices a lot of people coming out from the dinner. She's interviewed many of them before and wonders if she might spot Xiyang among the guests. One of the guests, who's clearly drunk, approaches her and offers to give her a ride home. Shuyi smiles and turns him down, but he insists, saying it's raining and it'll be hard for her to find a taxi. She tells him it's okay because her boyfriend is coming to pick her up. Xiaoming sees her from his car parked outside. He tells Xiyang that she's interviewed him before and seems like a decent person. He suggests that Xiyang should give her a ride home since she's been waiting all night for this interview, and it must have been tough on her. Xiyang looks in her direction. As Shuyi waits by the driveway, she thinks about Xiyang. There's no picture of him online, and she wonders if he's trying to be mysterious. She wonders if anyone really knows what he looks like. Just then, a car pulls up, and the driver gets out to open the door for her. Someone calls her from behind. It's Xiyang. He tells her he'll give her a lift home. Shuyi turns around to look at Xiyang, thinking he's probably one of those wealthy guys who feel entitled. She wonders why they always act that way. She declines his offer, telling him her boyfriend is on his way to pick her up. Xiyang quietly gets back into his car as the rain starts to come down harder. In the car with her boyfriend, Xingzhou, the rain is really coming down now. He apologizes for being late, saying he's not familiar with the area, and had to turn around a few times to find her. Shuyi tells him it's okay, and she understands since the rain is so heavy. She asks him who he spent his birthday with and if he had a good time. He hesitates, and she wonders if he was with Shufeng. He quickly says yes, surprised she knows him so well. Shuyi notices a scent of perfume on him and comments that she's surprised Shufeng is wearing perfume, wondering if he has a girlfriend now. Xingzhou pushes her gently away, saying she should stay on her side because he's driving. He messes up her hair a little and tells her to be good. Shuyi looks out the window, thinking. She asks him why he keeps ruffling her hair lately. Shuyi gets home and lies down on her bed, feeling tired. She thinks about Xingzhou and decides to call him before she goes to sleep. She looks for her phone but can't find it anywhere. She tries to remember where she last had it. She recalls using it before she left Warner's Manor, so it wasn't stolen. She figures it might be in Xingzhou's car. She uses her laptop to track her phone and is surprised to see that it's at a hospital. She wonders why it's there. It's raining and late, and she worries that something might have happened. A few minutes later, she makes her way to the hospital and sees Xingzhou's car outside. She's really surprised to see him here at this time. She looks up at the door and sees him standing with an umbrella. Just as she's about to call out to him, a young girl comes out of the hospital and hugs him. They start walking towards the car together. Shuyi is shocked. She hopes he'll push the girl away so she can hear whatever excuse he might have for her. But no, he holds the girl close as they walk under the umbrella. As Shuyi watches them, her mind drifts back to their earlier call. She remembers her colleague saying how understanding her boyfriend is, how Xingzhou couldn't explain the perfume, and instead pushed her away, and how he's been ruffling her hair a lot lately. Shuyi realizes she's not being delusional. Everything was clear from the start. She looks at the bracelet Xingzhou gave her and remembers when he promised to be committed. He had told her he spent the last 3 years chasing her, and would spend the rest of his life making her happy. He begged her to believe him. Now she sees him kissing someone else. Feeling hurt, she takes off the bracelet and places it on his car door before walking away. When she gets back home, she looks at the pictures they took together. The doorbell rings repeatedly. Finally, she gets up to see who's at the door. She opens it and sees Xingzhou standing there, holding the bracelet. He calls out to her. The next day at work, Shuyi heads over to see Tang Yi, the editor-in-chief, who called for her a few minutes ago. Tang Yi tells her that Mingyu Bank called and asked to reschedule the interview to next Thursday at 10 p.m. They also want to change some of the questions. Tang Yi asks Shuyi to send them an updated interview guide as soon as possible. Noticing that Shuyi looks upset, Tang Yi asks if she's disappointed about missing the chance to interview director Shi. Shuyi shakes her head and says it's not about the missed interview. She's feeling sad because she broke up with her boyfriend the night before. Flashback to last night, Xingzhou told her that the girl's family is impressive. Her uncle even drives a Rolls-Royce with a special license plate, and he's the only one in the whole city with it. He said he had no choice but to break up with her because he wants his career to succeed. Despite working hard, he still can't afford a house. He said he used to love her and wanted to be with her forever, but now he thinks it's better if they just stay friends. Angry, Shuyi went back into her house, grabbed the box full of their pictures, and threw it at him. She told him to get away, and that she wouldn't settle for just being friends. Back to the present, Shuyi's editor asks if her boyfriend has finally left. She says she always knew he wasn't good enough for Shuyi, and that Shuyi is like a treasure. With how hard she has worked and risen in her career, she will definitely find someone better. Shuyi looks down and asks what kind of man she should look for, wondering if she should aim for someone with a Rolls-Royce. The editor says yes, that Shuyi has the potential and qualifications to get whatever she wants. She advises Shuyi not to let her personal feelings affect her work. The editor hands Shuyi a file and tells her to pull herself together and head to the summit meeting at the financial center. After buying a coffee at a nearby shop, Shuyi is walking out. Since this is the only coffee shop around, she wouldn't have come here otherwise. As she reaches the door, she sees something she feared the most. Xingzhou is there with the new girl. Their eyes meet. It's so unlucky. They just broke up this morning, and now he's already with someone else. Xingzhou suggests to the new girl that they come back another time, but she insists. She clings to him and says she needs to drink coffee from this shop every day, or she feels sick. The female lead looks at them and notices that the new girl already seems to know who she is. She sees the bracelet she used to wear on the new girl's wrist. A thought crosses her mind. As she walks past them, she comments, "Bad people never change." The couple turns to look at her. Shuyi adds, "Some people just love second-hand things." Shuyi walks outside, trying to stay calm despite her anger. She watches as Xingzhou and his new girlfriend head to their car. He apologizes for her outburst in the coffee shop, but the new girl says she doesn't mind. What bothers her is the way Xingzhou was yelled at. He says they won't go to that coffee shop again, and that they'll stay away from Shuyi completely. As our girl stands outside and watches them drive away, she notices a car with a license plate that matches the one she saw the night Xingzhou kissed the girl. It's also a Rolls-Royce. She realizes now why he's so attached to it. She starts walking towards the car, her mind racing. She thinks about how some people only value you if you make sacrifices for them. If you don't, they'll just think you're foolish. She wonders if she wants to spend 20 years struggling, or if she wants someone powerful backing her up. Even if she can't make him pay, she decides she'll make him call her Auntie out of respect and turn his entire family upside down in the end. Shuyi smiles to herself with a mischievous thought. She stops by the window of the car and knocks on it. For a moment, there's silence, and she wonders if anyone is inside. Finally, the window slides down, and she sees a familiar face. It's him, the wealthy man she turned down before. She puts on a friendly smile and tells him that her phone is off and asks if she could use his phone to call a taxi. He doesn't say anything. Since he had approached her before, she thinks he might be interested in her. So, she suggests another option, maybe he could give her a ride if he's willing. He turns slowly to look at her, and says that he doesn't give rides to women with boyfriends. Shuyi is taken aback, as he rolls up the window and the car speeds away. Back in her office, she reflects on earlier events. The man who approached her last night turned out to be that woman's uncle, and he rejected her request for help today. She decides it's too embarrassing to dwell on and shifts her focus back to work. If her love life isn't working out, she wants her work life to be a success. Finally, the day of the interview arrives. As she walks to the bank, she hopes everything will go smoothly this time. Inside the bank, she heads to the reception and is handed a book to sign. She's surprised to see her colleague's name in it. She and her colleague have had issues ever since she started working there, and she's been worried about her interviews being taken away. She hurries inside, anxious about the possibility of her interview being snatched away again. As she exits the elevator, she almost runs into Secretary Chen. She tells him she's here for the scheduled interview. He seems surprised and asks if something came up for her. She's stunned to hear that her colleague came in this morning to conduct the interview, and the director happened to be available then. She can hardly believe what she's hearing. Xu Yuling really came to cause trouble. She forces a smile and apologizes, saying there must have been a mix-up at work. He apologizes for her coming, and as they are talking, she sees a young man walking out of an office. She's stunned when she recognizes him. It's the man from last night, the one she failed to approach. To make things even more surprising, Assistant Chen calls him Director Shi. It's the same person she was trying to get an interview with, the big financial figure, Xiyang. It seems like Xingzhou really knows how to pick them. As Assistant Chen talks to Director Shi, he quietly looks in her direction and starts walking past her. She wonders if he's just going to ignore her and leave. She can't let that happen. She's determined to get this interview, and is ready to embrace the Auntie title if needed. She calls out to him as he walks by, saying she's here for the interview, and has been eagerly waiting for it. She's ready for this chance. Assistant Chen looks puzzled, as if he's forgotten that he already mentioned the interview was done. Director Shi turns to look at her, and she smiles, asking if he can spare some time right now. He looks at her without saying anything. She walks towards him, pleading for just a little of his time and asking if it would be okay. He starts walking toward the elevator, and she feels a wave of shame, thinking she has failed again. As he steps into the elevator, he turns back and tells her to come with him. She feels relieved and happy, at least all her efforts haven't been for nothing. Once they are in the elevator and it starts moving down, she nervously asks where they are going. His phone rings, and the assistant tells her to stay quiet. Director Shi declines the call and puts his phone away. Then, the assistant's phone rings. He answers it, and the caller asks him to tell Director Shi to answer his phone. Hearing the voice, she assumes it's the niece from before. Director Shi tells his assistant to pass on a message to his niece, saying that he doesn't want to see her. As they ride down in the elevator, she realizes it's not as bad as she thought. Even though he's close to his niece, he's a strict uncle who means what he says, and his words hold weight in his family. They walk out of the building and head toward the car. Director Shi mentions that he has a long drive, so they can talk in the car. Inside, he looks at her, and she wonders if her expression and attitude seem professional enough. He asks if she's cold. There's a brief silence, and she wonders if it's okay for him to ask that. He seems very considerate and observant. She decides to make her move, lifting her head slightly and giving him a charming smile. She tells him she's fine. He opens the windows, and a breeze comes in. She starts to feel a bit cold, though she had just said she wasn't. Just because she said she wasn't cold doesn't mean she's actually comfortable. As the strong wind blows her hair all over the place and different thoughts swirl in her mind, she decides to pull herself together. She takes a hairband from her bag and ties her hair back. She then asks if she should start recording and takes out her recorder. Director She keeps a serious expression and doesn't look at her. She tells him that she'll record their whole conversation and send him the final edited version. The interview begins, and she explains the topic. He starts answering her questions. He talks non-stop, and after a while, she checks the recorder and sees that they've been talking for almost 2 hours. She didn't even realize how much time had passed. She has to stay really focused to keep up with his pace. She sneaks glances at him. He might be a bit eccentric, but he's definitely good-looking. Suddenly, he turns and catches her staring. He asks if they are done. She's startled by his sudden question and replies that she's done looking. She realizes she misspoke and feels embarrassed. She hides her face with her iPad, wishing she had just played it cool. After an awkward silence, the driver announces that they've arrived at their destination. The news is a relief. Director She steps out of the car and tells her it's been over 2 hours, so she can leave now. She looks around and realizes she's in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by what looks like a ranch. She has no idea how she's supposed to get back. As he walks towards the horses, she runs after him and says she has one last question. He tells her to go ahead, still not turning around. She asks if he is seeing anyone. He turns to look at her, and she smiles as she waits for his answer. He looks at her for a while, not saying anything. Just as he's about to speak, someone calls out to him, asking if he just arrived and who he's with. It's an older man, and she recognizes him as Xiyang Cheng. He's a huge name in finance, a real big shot and a leader in the industry. She's seen him on the news before. Director She starts to explain, but she cuts him off and introduces herself as reporter Zheng from the weekly finance magazine. Xiyang Cheng looks impressed and says he's read some of her work and thought it was fantastic. He's surprised to learn she's a young woman, and she feels flattered. Xiyang Cheng turns to Director She and mentions he didn't prepare anything because he expected to be alone. He says it's rare for women to visit his place. She picks up on his tone and realizes he might think she's Xiyang's girlfriend. They move on to the private ranch. As they walk further in, she takes in the view and compliments Mr. Guan on how well he's maintained the place. She admires the horses, saying they are lovely. Mr. Guan tells her that the most expensive ones are actually inside, which surprises her. She puts on an act to impress them, and Director She glances at her. She looks back at him, and he tells her he's going to change and asks her not to cause any trouble. She promises she won't and says she's glad he didn't kick her out. As he walks away, Mr. Guan brings a horse closer to her and comments that it seems like she knows Mr. She well. She replies that they've only just met today. He says he thinks she might be interested in horses and suggests she could learn to ride one while she's here. She's surprised by the offer. He tells her she can use an old outfit of his wife's in the changing room and leads her there. She's so excited she can barely hide it as she follows him. In the changing room, she quickly changes into the outfit, which fits her perfectly. But she has trouble buckling the belt. She struggles with it for a while but can't get it to work. She hears footsteps and realizes Xiyang must be done changing. She smiles and calls out to him, asking how to put on the belt and if he can help her. He stops and she feels happy, thinking he's going to help. But then he tells her that if she doesn't know how to put on the belt, maybe she shouldn't ride a horse. She's shocked by his reply. She finally figures out how to buckle the belt and comes outside. As she walks towards them, she realizes from their earlier conversation that Xiyang and Mr. Guan aren't related, but Mr. Guan and Xiyang's father were friends. The way Xiyang makes time to visit Mr. Guan shows how much he respects him. They don't show affection, but there's a deep respect between them, and Xiyang wants to impress Mr. Guan. Mr. Guan brings a horse over to her, and says it has the mildest temperament. He tells her that Xiyang will teach her how to ride. Since Xiyang is here, he won't refuse her this time. She smiles at Director Shi, who tells her he'll be behind her. He doesn't smile, and has a serious look on his face. She wonders why he looks so stern, but feels sure he won't hurt her. She climbs onto the horse, and he gets on behind her. She hoped he'd give her some tips, but now that he's sitting behind her, she feels a bit scared. He asks her what's wrong, and she tells him she's just nervous because it's her first time riding. He takes the reins and starts moving the horse slowly. For a while, they just go at a slow pace, and she thinks he might not be very warm. She sees Mr. Guan ahead and calls out to him, and Mr. Guan waves back. Suddenly, Xiyang pulls the reins and makes the horse go faster. She gets scared and starts screaming at him to stop, but he ignores her. The horse speeds up, jumping over the first hurdle, then the second, third, and fourth. She's losing her mind and begs him to stop. Finally, he listens and brings the horse to a halt. She almost falls off from the sudden stop, but he grabs her and keeps her from falling. She's relieved but also breathing heavily. Now that she's seen his real side, she decides not to forgive him. He asks if she still wants to learn to ride. Inside, she's screaming at him to forget it. Later that night, they drop her off at her apartment. She stays in the car for a bit, but then remembers that Xiyang has already left. She gets out and starts walking towards her place. She touches her ears and realizes her earrings are missing. She thinks they might be in the car, so she turns around, but the car speeds away quickly. Something tells her not to worry too much since the earrings aren't very expensive. Her thigh is still sore from the ride. The next day at work, her colleague Nan Nan calls her, saying she didn't see her message and that something big happened. She apologizes, saying she had too many messages, and was trying to finish her report. Nan Nan asks if she knows that Shuyuling also interviewed Xiyang the day before. She adds that she peeked at Shuyuling's work in the editor's office and found out that the outline was copied and all the questions were the same. This surprises the female lead, and she remembers Xiyang's strange expression from yesterday. It all starts to make sense now. The female lead thinks deeply about it, knowing that as long as it doesn't affect their results, Tang Yi doesn't care much about office politics. She decides to go for the best result, no matter who wrote it. But since both the interview and the report are hers, she feels frustrated that someone else might publish them under their own name. She stands up to confront the editor-in-chief, but feels pain in her thighs as she gets up. She flinches and touches the area, realizing she didn't notice the pain while writing last night. The bruise is getting worse, and she didn't expect horse riding to hurt this much. She blames Xiyang for this and is upset that her report is being stolen. As she heads toward the editor-in-chief's office, she hears a door slam and someone talking loudly on the phone. It's Xu Yuling, and she sounds frustrated. Yuling is walking to the convenience store, telling the caller that the editor always favors Shuyi. She says the editor keeps giving her work to Shuyi ever since Shuyi joined the department. Yuling complains that the editor is always on Shuyi's side. She also mentions the interview with Xiyang, saying it was the same interview and questions, but somehow Shuyi managed to get more answers. Yuling feels like Shuyi has some sort of spell over Xiyang. At this point, the female lead steps in and interrupts, saying that Yuling didn't cast any spell on anyone. Xu Yuling is so shocked that her phone drops to the floor. She keeps talking, saying she's very competent and that directors she seem to appreciate her work. She wonders why Yuling is acting like the victim. Inside, She smiles, feeling satisfied even though her interview and outline were stolen. She's glad they still chose her report in the end. Yuling just stands there, too scared to say anything. Her waist and legs don't hurt anymore. She thinks there's no pain without gain, especially if she wants to become successful. Later, she's in a taxi with Nan Nan, both happy that she got the feature story despite the plagiarism. Nan Nan asks what happened with Yuling, and she replies that the editor-in-chief just told them to move on and let it go. Her friend comments that no matter what happens, shameless people will always be shameless. When they arrive at their destination, she's about to get out of the car when she sees someone familiar getting out of a car across the street. It's Xingzhou. She doesn't want to see him, so she quickly stops her friend from getting out. Her friend asks what's wrong, but she can't explain right away. Eventually, she notices the guy and asks if he's her boyfriend. She guesses that she was dumped and cheated on. The female lead is surprised her friend guessed correctly. Her friend says she remembers that he used to drive a Honda, but is now driving a Benz. She thinks he must have hooked up with a rich woman. She adds that the Benz is just AC class, so it's not a huge upgrade, and it seems the new girl isn't that wealthy. The female lead starts to think deeply. She remembers that Xiyang drives a Bentley and a Rolls-Royce, but his niece only has a mid-tier car. It seems like he doesn't spoil her with money. She plays with her earring and wonders if Xiyang is a bit of a penny pincher. In Xiyang's car, he's sitting in the back, working on his system. He notices something sparkling out of the corner of his eye. He picks it up and sees it's an earring. At that moment, his assistant tells him that reporter Zheng Shuyi is calling and offers him the phone. Xiyang learns that she says she forgot something in the car. The assistant hands Xiyang the phone, and she tells him she thinks she left her pearl earrings in his car. She asks if he's seen them. Still holding the earrings in his hand, Xiyang tells her he hasn't seen them. She pleads with him to check again, because it's very important to her. She explains that the earrings were given to her by her grandmother, passed down from her mother, and it's a family heirloom. As she talks, Xiyang examines the earring closely. She then says that the earrings are actually part of her dowry, meant to be worn on her wedding day. She adds that wearing them reminds her of her grandmother, whom she hasn't seen in a long time. She starts to cry softly. Xiyang tells her he has found the earrings, and she's relieved, thinking her plan is working. However, Xiyang is surprised to see that the dowry is made of plastic. She says she didn't want to trouble him by asking him to bring the earrings to her, so she asks for his address to pick them up herself. When he gives her the address, it's impressive. As she looks at the building, she realizes it must be Xiyang's place. There's no way Assistant Chen could live there. She smiles to herself, thinking her plan to become a White Lotus auntie is working. She goes to the door and knocks. When it opens, she greets without looking, and steps inside, noticing that it's a bit dark. As she walks further in, she sees him sitting with a book in his hands. She takes a moment to admire him before he tells her where the earring is. She picks it up from the table, feeling like her mission is accomplished. But then she starts thinking of something to talk about to keep her in the house a bit longer. She notices his music collection, and sees that he's playing songs by her favorite artist. She's surprised to find out he likes popular music. As he pours a drink from across the room, she asks if he likes songs by that artist. He doesn't answer, so she mentions that she has all their songs in her collection. She's about to ask which song is his favorite, when she spots a bag on the sofa. It's a woman's bag, the kind a young lady might carry. She realizes he must have a girlfriend who's still around. She starts to panic, thinking she might be in trouble. Quickly, she bows and tells him she has found her earring, so she'll leave now. She thanks him for keeping it safe and wishes him well. He looks surprised and asks if she's leaving already. She tells him it's getting late, and she doesn't want to trouble him anymore. She also mentions that she still has reports to write, so she needs to leave. She starts to head out quickly. But as she reaches the door, she pauses and starts thinking. She realizes she made an assumption about him having a girlfriend. Is she really going to change her plans just based on an assumption? She decides to go back and check with him before leaving. She walks back to him and says she had a small problem on her way here. She asks if she can borrow something from his girlfriend. He looks surprised and asks if he heard her correctly. She asks if the person she saw earlier is not his girlfriend. He smiles and says no, she isn't. She's relieved and comments that it's good to know. He turns to face her fully and asks what's good about what he said. She stammers, trying to come up with an answer. She says it's just better to clear up any misunderstandings. He asks her what misunderstanding she's talking about. He starts moving closer to her, making her feel unsteady. She struggles to find words, but doesn't know what to say. He helps her out by asking if she's talking about his niece, and what there might be to misunderstand. She feels a bit relieved and tells him not to worry about it. Then it hits her, his niece. She wonders what she'd do if she bumped into that woman right now. She tells him it wouldn't be good if his niece misunderstood things, so she says goodnight, and leaves quickly, leaving him alone. He stands there for a moment, surprised by her reaction. A young woman walks into the living room, surprised at how dark it's gotten so quickly when she just started her nap. She says she thinks she heard a woman's voice a little while ago. The young woman is Qin Shiyu, Xiyang's real niece. She asks him if someone came over. Her uncle doesn't answer, so she wonders why he's looking at her like that, thinking maybe she did something wrong. The scene shifts to Xiyang and his niece. She's complaining about having to keep a job. She says that everyone in their family works hard to make money, and someone should at least spend it. She points out that they have enough money to last her for 3 lifetimes. She says she didn't have to work so hard in school, and now she's working hard for just a small amount of money each month. She begs him to postpone it until next year, but he won't agree, saying their family doesn't raise freeloaders. The next morning at Zheng Shuyi's office, she's at her desk, and her colleague is with her, talking about a new intern who's starting soon. Her colleague looks at the intern's results and resume, noting that the person is smart, and went to the editor-in-chief's alma mater. From the resume, it's clear the person is a rich kid. Zheng Shuyi wonders how she'll manage training a spoiled brat while handling her work and romance. A bit later, Zheng Shuyi is at her desk working when a young girl comes up to her. The girl asks if she's Zheng Shuyi, and says the human resource department asked her to find Shuyi. Shuyi turns to see a young girl who looks a bit down. The girl introduces herself as Qin Shiyu, and says she'll be under Shuyi's care. Zheng Shuyi is putting on her noise-cancelling earbuds. She's about to finish the draft of Xiyang's interview, and decides to let the new intern handle it. She hands Qin Shiyu the recordings of the interview and tells her to listen to them, organize the content, and write a draft. Shiyu takes the task, thinking it's just dictation and shouldn't be too difficult. As she starts listening, she realizes it's her uncle's voice. She struggles to understand because he uses a lot of jargon. She calls out to Zheng Shuyi for help, but gets no response. She tries again, but Shuyi is too focused on her work to hear her. Shiyu gets really angry, feeling that no one has ever ignored her like this before. Later in the evening, Zheng Shuyi stretches and notices how quickly the time has passed. She removes her earbuds and goes to check on the intern, but finds no one around. She assumes that Shiyu isn't used to working yet. At Xiyang's family house, they are having dinner, and Shiyu is complaining about her job. She grumbles that her first task was to transcribe a recording, which she thinks is beneath her since she's a reporter, not a typist. Song Yulan, a singer and Qin Shiyue's mother, comments on Shiyue's complaint. She tries to remember the name of Shiyue's supervisor, but forgets part of it. Qin Xiaoming, Shiyue's father, helps her complete the name. Shiyu is surprised that her dad knows about her supervisor. Her father says the supervisor is a good person, and that Shuyi will learn a lot from her. Shuyi replies that she's eager to learn, but wonders if the supervisor will be willing to teach her. Her father doesn't quite understand her concern. Shuyi then glances at her uncle, who has been silent throughout the conversation. Her uncle clears his throat and announces that he's finished eating. Shuyi keeps looking at him, thinking he's the one who got her the position at Finance Weekly, so he should definitely support her. The next day at work, Zheng Shuyi greets everyone as she walks in and then sits down, feeling tired. Her friend notices and asks what's wrong. Shuyi explains that the editor-in-chief liked the final draft, and they are just waiting for approval from Mingyu Bank. She's excited that everything is coming together. Just then, an email arrives. Shuyi opens it and sees that Mingyu Bank didn't approve the draft. She's shocked. Shuyi feels it's not a big deal, she'll just revise the draft. She sends the second draft, but it's still not approved. The next day, she sends the third draft, and it's not approved either. She's getting frustrated. Her colleague points out that the feedback doesn't include any suggestions. Shuyi explains that it's her first time interviewing Xiyang, and she didn't expect him to have such high standards. Her friend asks if she thinks Xiyang has a grudge against her. Shuyi replies that she doesn't think he'd be that petty. Meanwhile, Shuyi overhears their conversation, and is pleased that her uncle is being tough on Shuyi. On the other hand, Yuling mocks Shuyi's situation. Shuyi feels dejected as the deadline is approaching, and she's stuck revising without clear feedback. She decides to rush to the editor-in-chief's office to ask for Xiyang's phone number, saying she wants to ask him directly. Later that evening, Xiyang is arriving home. As the driver pulls up, Xiyang sees Shuyi standing by the entrance, shivering from the cold. Xiyang steps out of his car and notices Shuyi calling to him. He asks her why she wants to see him. Shuyi isn't sure how to start. She thinks about asking if he's unsatisfied with her work, but she feels that might be too direct. Instead, she says she felt he might want to see her, so she came to find him. Xiyang just looks at her, silent. Shuyi worries she might have said the wrong thing. He asks her how she figured out that he wanted to see her. Shuyi decides to be straightforward. She asks him why he's sending her story back, and why he hasn't answered her calls. Xiyang replies that he's not satisfied with it. Shuyi asks him what exactly he isn't happy with. She moves closer and tells him if he points out the issues, she's sure she can fix them. Xiyang doesn't answer and instead turns to walk away. Shuyi panics, he's leaving, and the deadline is approaching. She's worked hard for this story and can't let it slip away. She calls out that maybe he just wanted to see her. Xiyang turns and looks at her. Shuyi is scared she might have said something wrong. Xiyang then tells her to come inside. Shuyi is surprised and he repeats the invitation. Shuyi feels a bit desperate, but hopeful as she wonders if Xiyang is actually interested in her charm. Inside his house, Xiyang takes off his coat, plays some music, and tells her to sit down and start revising the draft. Shuyi quickly gets to work on her laptop, wondering if he really just wants her to fix the draft. While she's typing away, Xiyang pours himself a glass of wine and asks if she wants anything to drink. Shuyi says she'd like the same wine. Xiyang tells her it's wine, and she replies that she knows. He pours a glass for her and brings it over. Just then, his phone rings. Xiyang answers it and sits on the sofa while Shuyi works behind him. It's his niece on the line. She asks if she can drop off some good wine she won at an auction, but Xiyang says it's not necessary. She notices Shuyi drinking wine and asks if Xiyang is with someone. He tells her he's busy and hangs up the phone. Shuyi calls him over to the sofa and shows him the revised draft, asking if it's okay. Xiyang looks it over and says no, it's still too wordy. Shuyi goes back to revise it again. As she works, Xiyang sits alone, thinking about what his niece said on the phone. After a few minutes, Shuyi shows Xiyang another draft and points out that there's still an issue with a certain section that doesn't quite capture what he meant. She asks him to explain what he was trying to say there, but he tells her to figure it out herself, asking if he should do her job for her. After several hours of drinking and revising, Shuyi feels like she's finally got it right. She shows Xiyang the new draft, and he agrees that it looks good now. She's surprised and happy. She asks if there's anything else to fix, saying she's ready to keep revising if needed. Then, she tells herself to stop talking and just wait for his response. Xiyang then asks if she doesn't mind being alone with him in his house for so long. He wonders if her boyfriend won't be upset about it. Shuyi says she doesn't have a boyfriend. Xiyang looks surprised, and she explains that they broke up the night she first met him. If you're eager for the next chapter, drop a comment expressing your interest in a part 2. Don't forget to subscribe